Imagine this. It's 3 a.m. and you're staring at the ceiling. Your mind spins through 1,000 versions of yourself, one for your family, one for your friends, another for the person you're trying to love. But then there's the version you keep locked away, buried beneath the expectations, judgments, and noise of the world. It's the version that feels truest, but also the most terrifying. Because to embrace it would mean risking everything you've built around the illusion of who you're supposed to be. Maybe it happened years ago, when you were still young enough to believe the world would accept you as you were. Maybe you expressed yourself boldly, an interest, an idea, an emotion so genuine it felt like standing naked in the middle of a crowded room. And maybe, just maybe, someone laughed, someone sneered, someone told you that you were wrong, foolish, or broken for being that way. Since then, you've built walls of personas, scripts, and social armor. You've learned to blend in, to smile when you don't feel like smiling, to chase after dreams that were never yours to begin with. And somehow you've convinced yourself that you're doing just fine, that you're happy enough. But deep down, there's a tension, a gnawing sensation that something essential has been lost. What if all this pretending has turned into a prison of your own making? What if the very act of hiding your true self has poisoned your mind, leaving you trapped in a life that feels hollow and devoid of real meaning? You see, most people don't question the masks they wear. They believe them to be their true identity. And yet, buried beneath the surface is the haunting suspicion that they are living someone else's life, following a script handed to them by society, family, or fear itself. The question that creeps in during quiet moments is this: who would you be if you weren't afraid of rejection, ridicule, or failure? But the deeper question, the one that makes your chest tighten and your breath quicken, is this: are you even capable of finding that person anymore? After years of conformity, compromise, and carefully curated facades, has the real you been lost for good? You can feel the weight of this question in your chest, like a stone pressing down on your very soul. It's not just a philosophical inquiry, it's a matter of survival. Because what happens to a person who spends their entire life being someone they're not? What kind of emptiness awaits them when they reach the end of their days and realize they never truly lived at all? And yet, the alternative is equally terrifying, because to live authentically means facing the very things you've been running from. It means dismantling the false self you've spent years building, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the raw, unfiltered essence of who you are. It means accepting that some people will reject you, misunderstand you, and perhaps even despise you for daring to be real. So here you are, caught between two equally harrowing realities: the safety of conformity and the chaos of authenticity, the prison of pretending and the risk of true freedom, the lie you've built and the truth you fear to confront. But is the fear of living authentically really about the world's judgment? Or is it about something deeper, something primal that lurks within your own mind, whispering that you are not enough, that your true self is flawed beyond redemption? Before you can even begin to answer that question, you must first understand why this fear exists at all. And to do that, you have to go deep, much deeper than you've ever dared to go before. What is it about living authentically that feels so paralyzing? The simple answer is fear, but that's a surface-level explanation. The truth is more insidious, woven into the deepest corners of your mind. To confront it, you have to unearth the roots of this fear and lay them bare. Start with the psychological side. Carl Jung believed that within each of us exists something called the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or deny, because they don't align with our conscious self-image. It's the anger you were told was unacceptable, the desires you were taught to feel ashamed of, the thoughts you were conditioned to keep hidden. You've buried them so effectively that they seem to have vanished. But they haven't. They've only grown darker, more twisted, until the very act of facing them feels like staring into an abyss. And that's precisely where the fear begins. Because authenticity requires you to confront your shadow, to integrate the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime denying. To do so means acknowledging that you are not always the kind, generous, socially acceptable person you pretend to be. It means admitting that you are complex, contradictory, and flawed. This isn't just about individual psychology, it's also a societal phenomenon. From the moment you were born, you were handed a blueprint for how to live. Go to school, get a job, follow the rules, keep your head down and fit in. Modern society has mastered the art of conformity, shaping individuals to serve the collective, not to realize their own truth. As Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And make no mistake, the tribe is powerful. It's the voice of society, culture, family, constantly whispering that safety lies in obedience, that acceptance is earned through submission to the norm. But safety is a double-edged sword. The more you embrace societal expectations, the further you drift from your own truth. And here's the cruel irony. The pursuit of external validation only deepens your internal void. Because even when the world applauds you, the applause feels hollow. It's not really meant for you, it's meant for the mask you wear. It's easy to assume that fear of judgment is the primary obstacle. And yes, judgment from others is powerful. But what if the real fear runs deeper? What if it's the terror of truly seeing yourself for what you are, beneath the labels, the roles, the personas you've created to survive in a world obsessed with appearances? Arthur Schopenhauer believed that life itself is an endless cycle of striving and suffering, and in a way, he wasn't wrong. But his insight goes even further. The real agony lies not just in striving for external goals, but in the inner struggle to reconcile who you are with who you pretend to be. When you attempt to live authentically, you confront not just societal expectations, but the illusions you've created to protect yourself from pain. The human psyche craves coherence. We need our beliefs, actions, and identity to align. When they don't, we experience cognitive dissonance, a mental distress so profound that it drives us to distort reality to maintain our sanity. And here's the unsettling truth. You've likely spent years building a coherent but false narrative about yourself just to avoid that discomfort. To embrace authenticity would mean shattering that narrative and facing the dissonance head-on. But it's not only psychological, the philosophical roots run just as deep. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid the discomfort of true freedom. Because freedom, real freedom, is terrifying. It means you have to take full responsibility for your existence, your choices, and your identity. It means acknowledging that you are not a passive recipient of life's circumstances, but an active creator of your own reality. And perhaps that's the most horrifying revelation of all, because if you accept that you have the power to shape your own life, then you can no longer blame society, your upbringing, or even your own past for the person you become. The responsibility rests solely on your shoulders, so you remain trapped in a psychological paradox. On one hand, you long to be free, to live a life that feels real and meaningful. On the other, you cling to the comforting illusion that you are powerless, that your true self is too flawed, too unacceptable to be shown to the world. The fear of living authentically is not just a fear of rejection. It is a fear of transformation, a fear of dismantling the false structures you've built and stepping into the unknown. And above all, it's the fear of meeting your own gaze without flinching. But there's something even more disturbing to consider. What if your inability to live authentically is not just harming you, but the world around you? What if your failure to embrace your true self is contributing to a society that values conformity over creativity, obedience over individuality, and mediocrity over greatness? And so the real question remains, are you willing to face the truth of who you are, no matter how uncomfortable, chaotic, or frightening it may be? But before you can answer that, you need to understand the real cost of your avoidance. Because while you're hiding, something precious is slipping away. But there's something even more disturbing to consider. What if your decision to avoid authenticity is not just a personal failing, but a societal sickness? What if the very culture you were raised in thrives on your inauthenticity, encouraging you to trade your own soul for a version of yourself that fits neatly within the framework of modern existence? Look around. We are living in an era of mass identity crises. The rise of social media, consumerism, and hyperconnectivity has created a system that constantly tells you who to be. Success is measured by metrics: followers, likes, wealth, status. The illusion of perfection is sold as a commodity, and your own genuine nature is the price you're expected to pay. But the consequences of living inauthentically run deeper than surface-level misery. This isn't just about feeling unfulfilled or occasionally frustrated. This is about the slow, corrosive decay of your own mind and spirit. Imagine living each day suppressing parts of yourself, forcing your thoughts and desires into boxes that were never meant to contain them. The strain of constantly pretending eats away at your mental health. Anxiety, depression, addiction. These aren't just personal flaws, they're symptoms of a much larger problem. Gabor Mate, the renowned expert on addiction and trauma, argues that the root of many psychological disorders is a fundamental disconnection from the self. The pain you try to numb with substances, distractions, or compulsive behaviors often comes from denying your own truth. When you try to meet external expectations instead of living in alignment with your genuine self, the mind rebels. It turns inward, punishing you for the lie you continue to live. Think of how often you make decisions based not on what you truly want, but on what you believe will bring you acceptance, validation, or a fleeting sense of security. You choose a career that looks respectable rather than meaningful. You cultivate friendships that feel safe rather than real. You adopt beliefs and opinions because they are fashionable rather than authentic. But the cost of these compromises is staggering, because every time you betray your own truth, you reinforce the belief that you are not good enough as you are. You tell yourself that your desires are wrong, that your dreams are foolish, that your true nature is somehow unworthy of existence. And perhaps the most tragic part is this: the more you hide from your own authenticity, the more you lose touch with what makes you feel alive. Passion, creativity, genuine connection. These things become casualties of your war against yourself. You start to feel like a spectator in your own life, going through the motions while your soul remains trapped behind layers of societal conditioning. But here's the real kicker. The longer you continue living this way, the harder it becomes to even recognize your own truth. What was once a vibrant inner world slowly turns to static, a dim whisper drowned out by the noise of everything you think you're supposed to be. Arthur Schopenhauer spoke of life as an endless striving, a constant reaching for fulfillment that is never truly achieved. But what if the reason so many people feel trapped in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction is because they are striving toward goals that aren't truly their own? What if the pursuit itself is not the problem, but rather the object of that pursuit, an identity crafted to meet someone else's expectations? The unseen consequences of living inauthentically are not just personal, they're societal. A world filled with people too afraid to be themselves is a world where conformity becomes the norm and creativity becomes the exception. It's a world where courage is punished and mediocrity is rewarded. You see it everywhere. People chasing careers they hate for the sake of financial security. Artists abandoning their craft because it doesn't fit the approved mold of productivity. Relationships built on superficial compatibility rather than genuine connection. But worst of all, you see it in yourself. Every time you choose comfort over truth, convenience over courage, you deepen the wound that is your own existence. You build walls so high around your real self that even you can't see who you truly are. And yet, despite all this pain, you continue the charade, because the alternative, tearing down the facade and confronting your own shadow, is a terrifying prospect. To be authentic is to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable is to risk rejection, ridicule, and even failure. But there's something you need to realize. The consequences of not being yourself are far worse than the pain of confronting your truth. Because at least pain is real. At least pain is a signal that something within you is still fighting for the life you were meant to live. But how do you break free from something so deeply ingrained within you? How do you dismantle the structures of inauthenticity when they have been built so carefully over years, even decades? This is where most people give up. They acknowledge the problem but find themselves paralyzed by the sheer weight of it. The unknown feels like an abyss, and the comfort of familiarity, however toxic, feels like safety. But there is a way out, and it begins with a rebellion. A rebellion against everything you've been told about who you should be. A rebellion against the societal mechanisms that thrive on your inauthenticity. And most importantly, a rebellion against your own mind's desire for comfort over truth. But this rebellion requires more than just insight, it requires action. This is where most people give up. They acknowledge the problem but find themselves paralyzed by the sheer weight of it. The years of self-betrayal feel too thick to cut through, the chains of conformity too heavy to break. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. Nothing will change until you make the terrifying decision to confront yourself. Not the version of you that you present to the world, but the you that exists when the noise of expectations falls away. So how do you begin this rebellion against your own falsehood? It starts with a question so deceptively simple, it almost feels absurd. What do I actually want? Not what's expected of you, not what sounds impressive, not what's safe. What do you want at the very core of your being? The answer won't come easily. It will be buried under years of programming, distractions, and the relentless pursuit of external approval. But you must dig, and you must be willing to face the discomfort of finding out that most of what you've been striving for is a lie. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, a journey toward becoming the person you were meant to be, rather than the person society has conditioned you to become. But individuation requires you to confront your shadow, those parts of yourself you've hidden away because they didn't fit the polished, acceptable persona you've carefully constructed. You've been trained to believe that your shadow is something to be ashamed of, something to be suppressed. But the irony is that your shadow holds the very key to your liberation. It contains all the parts of you that have been denied expression, all the creative energy and raw authenticity that has been locked away for the sake of acceptance. Think of the artists who changed the world, the philosophers, the revolutionaries, the visionaries who defied convention. They didn't do so because they were without flaws or contradictions. They did so because they embraced those very flaws, turning them into strengths. They refused to live by society's template, choosing instead to create their own path, however painful or uncertain it may have been. But embracing your shadow is not just about acknowledging your darker impulses or hidden desires. It's about integrating them, making them a conscious part of your identity rather than something to be denied. This means looking at your fears, your desires, your ambitions, and your insecurities with brutal honesty, and then slowly but deliberately you begin to act. Not in the way you've been taught to act, but in a way that feels congruent with your true nature. This is where the rebellion begins. Not with a dramatic gesture or a grand declaration, but with the smallest acts of authenticity. Say no when you mean it. Follow interests that make no sense to anyone but you. Question everything you've been told about who you're supposed to be. Take risks, not just for external rewards, but for the sheer joy of living in alignment with your own truth. It will feel uncomfortable, even terrifying. The world will resist your authenticity because it threatens the structure of conformity that so many people cling to. You will face criticism, judgment, and the crushing doubt that comes from stepping outside the accepted narrative. But what's the alternative? To continue living a life that feels borrowed, scripted, hollow? To keep wearing a mask even as it grows heavier and more suffocating with each passing day? The rebellion against your false self is not something that happens all at once. It's a daily act of courage, a conscious decision to reject the lies you've been taught to believe. And it requires you to confront one of the most difficult truths of all. You are the architect of your own cage. No one else has the power to keep you trapped unless you allow them to. No societal expectation, no parental approval, no cultural narrative is strong enough to hold you prisoner if you choose to break free. But choosing authenticity is not a one-time event. It's a process, a series of small but significant decisions that gradually lead you toward a life that feels real. Think about that for a moment. A life that feels real. How long has it been since you felt that? Since you acted without hesitation, spoke without filtering your words through a web of social expectations, pursued something simply because it felt true to you. Imagine reclaiming that power. Imagine shedding everything false and emerging as someone so aligned with their own truth that the opinions of others feel like nothing more than background noise. You will lose people along the way. That is inevitable. Some will be unable to accept the real you, clinging instead to the version of you they once knew. But those who truly matter will celebrate your transformation, not resent it. And the irony? By choosing authenticity, you will attract people and opportunities that are genuinely aligned with your true self. It may not happen immediately. The road will be harsh and unforgiving at times, but the rewards will be worth every ounce of effort. Because when you live authentically, you're no longer striving for someone else's definition of success. You're not chasing happiness as if it's some elusive prize to be won. You're creating meaning. You're building a life that feels like your own. But before you can fully embrace this new way of being, there's one final realization you must confront. A truth so profound that it will shatter every remaining illusion you still cling to. Are you ready to face it? Here's the truth you've been circling around. The revelation you've been avoiding because it changes everything. Authenticity isn't something you find. It's something you create. The self you've been searching for isn't buried somewhere waiting to be discovered. It's constructed moment by moment through the choices you make and the truths you choose to embody. The paradox is that you've always had the freedom to be yourself, but you were too afraid to claim it. Society teaches you that authenticity is a fixed essence, a pre-existing truth you must uncover like some hidden treasure. But the greatest secret of all is that it's a fluid, ever-evolving process. And that's why it's so terrifying. Because it means that you are responsible for defining who you are, without the safety net of external validation. It means that you are both the sculptor and the sculpture, the writer and the character, the artist and the canvas. And the moment you grasp that, you realize something both liberating and daunting. You are free. Free to defy expectations. Free to change. Free to rewrite the story of who you are, even if that story contradicts everything you once believed about yourself. But freedom comes at a cost. It requires you to relinquish the comforting illusion that someone else has the answers. It requires you to abandon the idea that your purpose can be handed to you by society, religion, or culture. It requires you to accept that your journey is yours alone, and no one can walk it for you. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he left something unsaid, something most people never understand. The privilege of a lifetime is not simply discovering who you are, but having the courage to choose who you become. Think of the great philosophers and thinkers who dared to embrace their own authenticity. Nietzsche, who rejected societal norms to create his own system of values. Sartre, who insisted that existence precedes essence, that you are defined by your actions, not by some preordained nature. Dostoevsky, who delved into the darkest corners of the human psyche to find truth amid the chaos. They all understood one thing: authenticity is an act of rebellion against everything that tells you to conform. It is a declaration of independence from the opinions of others, and it is the only path that leads to a life that feels real. But here's the final, most powerful realization of all. Authenticity is not about rejecting the world. It's about embracing yourself within it. It's not about withdrawing from society or burning down every bridge you've built. It's about building a bridge between who you are and the world around you. It's about making peace with your shadow, integrating your desires, flaws, and dreams into a cohesive whole. And when you do that, something miraculous happens. You stop feeling like an outsider in your own life. You stop living with the constant ache of betrayal that comes from pretending to be someone you're not. You stop measuring your worth by external standards and start creating your own. But perhaps most importantly, you begin to attract the right people and opportunities. Not because you're trying to fit in, but because you're standing so firmly in your truth that the world has no choice but to respond. Imagine looking in the mirror and feeling at peace with what you see. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Imagine walking through life with a sense of purpose that doesn't need to be explained or justified to anyone else. Imagine creating something so uniquely yours that it feels like an extension of your own soul. This is not some distant, unattainable ideal. It's something you can choose right now, in this very moment. But it requires a decision, one most people will never make. Because the truth is, living authentically is not about having the courage to be yourself. It's about having the courage to become yourself, to abandon the comforting lie that your true self is waiting to be found, and to instead build that self from the ground up. It's about giving yourself permission to be incomplete, messy, contradictory, and ever-evolving. It's about seeing your shadow not as something to be feared, but as a source of power and insight. And most importantly, it's about embracing the terrifying freedom that comes with knowing you are the creator of your own life. Will you choose to keep living inauthentically, hiding behind masks and false identities? Or will you take the risk of becoming who you were always meant to be, not by finding yourself, but by creating yourself? The choice has always been yours, and it always will be.